Hi. We're super excited to have three awesome VCs representing three of the best US, or in your case, Julie, global firms, but originally US firms. So first of all, thank you so much for coming. I think the best thing to do would be to let you introduce yourselves. So let's just start with you, Leigh Marie, and then who are you? What should people in the audience know about your fund? And what deal flow do you want people to contact you about?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. I'm Leigh Marie. I'm a principal at Founders Fund. Been there for about a year and a half. Prior to Founders Fund, I was one of the first engineers at Scale AI, and then a product manager there. So as for Founders Fund, we're about 15 years old. We're a generalist fund started by some of the PayPal co-founders under the thesis that we want to back really strong founders across all industries across the world and let them run their own companies. So I guess me in particular, given my background, I love enterprise software, especially developer tools and data and ML infrastructure and applications, especially at the early stages.
Hey everyone, I'm Ellen. I'm a partner at boldstart Ventures. Before this, I was a founder of a company called Dark, where we built a programming language. Guessing from that background, at boldstart, we love to invest in founders building developer tooling, infrastructure, or other enterprise-related products. Important things to know is it can never be too early. We really love to be the first institutional check across the board. So feel free to come to me even if you're just thinking about getting started with something new. And beyond that, we work primarily with technical founders.
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm Julie with Lightspeed in Europe. So joined the team essentially to help build out the European fund for us. We are generally a global fund, founded 20 years ago, really invest anywhere from seed stage to pre-IPO, consumer and B2B. However, every single partner and investor is focused on a specific area, of course. So I myself do mostly B2B enterprise in the early stage, meaning seed and Series A mostly. Love a lot of infrastructure and data tooling as well, like everyone on the stage, but also starting into application layer where it fits. So spend a lot of time also in the revenue org, for instance, and related tooling. So yeah, nice to see you.
Cool. So to kick things off, there's a Hebrew expression: what you see from there, you don't see from here. So rather than ask you, what do you think of Denmark? It's beautiful, everything works, right? People are super nice, great technology. What I want to ask you guys is, from your perspective where you sit in the US, or in your case in a US firm in London, what do you see from where you sit that you think people in the Danish tech ecosystem or the Nordic tech ecosystem might not see or realize? What can they learn from your perspective that they might not see? Let me start with Julie, because you're sort of a bridge, and then we can go to the real Americans.
Yeah, so I think there's a few topics actually that are quite interesting, and I don't think that's something that people necessarily need to learn or do wrong. It's more working for a US fund from a European perspective really taught me as well how to think even bigger than I anticipated before, and even more global in a scale. And so I think if you go to meet a US investor as a European business, you need to adapt that mindset as well a little bit. Purely based on the fund size that you're usually facing is just bigger. European funds tend to be a bit smaller maybe than the bigger US funds. So the economics work differently. And so you need to really be thinking about this global huge vision and how you're going to get there over the long term as much as the short term sort of goal that you want to get to. And I think that's something that European founders have clicked on, and we see it more and more, and I'm really excited about that. But I think that's been sort of a learning journey over the last few years a little bit, for sure.
I would definitely agree with that. And then to build on it as well, often European founders come from the context of pitching European investors, and there can be a little bit of a shift you want to make when you're talking to someone from the Valley or from other global funds, where sometimes people will come in and level set from the very beginning of this is why you should care about developers to a fund that's spent all of their time investing in developer-focused companies. And so I think there's somewhat of you can be more ambitious, and you can also jump more quickly into what you are doing and how it's different, rather than having to have a first half hour just about the overall space that you're working in.
For sure. And then I think maybe just to kind of echo some of the points here, I think sometimes especially European founders could get very caught up in sort of the metrics for the Series A or the metrics for the Series B And as Julie was saying, it really is about the story and the global story. And I think in Europe, you do have the opportunity to kind of start more local, and then you develop the playbook to move across different countries, which can develop quite a moat. But then there does need to be a story for why this is a global, very large business.
So are there areas that you would say that Europe is ahead of the US, where you come to Europe and you're particularly excited about a certain space where you feel like there's better tech or better ambition?
I feel like it's always a bit like given certain universities or certain companies that are already here. So like different areas of machine learning, like machine learning safety in particular, I really look to Europe and some of the universities here. That's one example.
I would say it almost goes city by city in a lot of contexts. So for instance, a lot of really interesting developer tooling has been coming out of Berlin because there's such a robust open source ecosystem there. And there have been a lot of founders who've been spending the time together. Or similarly, in Paris, I've seen a lot of people who are really top-notch with functional programming languages and building the technologies that sit on top of those, because most of the educational CS system is in functional languages. And so I'd say it definitely varies region by region, rather than being a holistic, all of Europe is better at a certain technology.
I actually think that the fintech ecosystem in Europe is especially strong and super interesting. So we, for instance, decided to open our fintech office in New York. Because New York is really interesting in that sense, but also it's closer to London, closer to the other hubs. Paris, France has become a big space for that. So yeah, I'm quite excited about that, actually.
Yes. And a lot of that's the regulatory environment, particularly in the Nordics, is pushing a lot of that fintech innovation.
Yeah.
So you're all very well known for backing dev tools and infrastructure companies. What are some of the more exciting business models that you've seen emerge in that space lately? Anyone want to?
Absolutely, and it kind of goes back to something that Ellen was just saying about particular areas of open source being really strong over here. There's one company we invested in, their Series A, they're called Neon. They do serverless Postgres, and it's open source, and a lot of the key developers are based here in Europe. It basically kind of gives you the experience out of the box, 3 seconds, set up a Postgres database, can scale down to 0, can do branching. So yeah, super excited about sort of the developer experience that this unlocks.
So is that a European company or is it just a globally distributed company?
It's based in the US, but there are a lot of like co-founders and developers in Europe. Yeah.
Okay. And any other areas that you guys are excited about? Any?
I can go.
What's your,
So I think actually also maybe Europe specific, talking about the data ecosystem, actually a business in your portfolio that I quite like called Paradigm. More going into sort of the thesis of collaboration between data engineers, data analysts as well, and sort of the business user. I think that's been a topic that's been around for the last 2 years and quite heavily discussed also in context of a metrics layer and a semantic layer. But I actually see a lot of companies coming in Europe up. So that is one. There's another business called Latitude, for instance, in Barcelona going after a similar thesis. So yeah, I think still TBD where the space will end up, but I think Europe is actually quite interesting there as well.
I think we're seeing a lot of things, like you're saying, that are bridging multiple paradigms that we've had before instead of just doing one specific solution. So similarly, I feel like it used to be if you were an open source company, it was 100% bottom subtraction, go really big, just make whatever you can work, don't worry at all about revenue. And then on the flip side, there were the companies that sold top-down $1 million deals right away. And what I've been seeing more recently, and I think Europe is very well suited to this, is a sandwich model where people will pick 3 specific design partners who they think will work well with what they're building and help them validate the long-term use case, but not underinvest in that early community and maybe what may be the free use case that eventually drives the long-term adoption.
Right.
Yeah.
Can you say a bit more about that? Because I find myself often advising companies to strategically defocus. It used to be the conventional wisdom, well, you have to focus on one of these things. And what I'm finding myself saying more and more is if you can successfully but very carefully do maybe 2 things that are orthogonal at once, you become exponentially more valuable. But it seems like very dangerous advice to give. So how do you guys think about those cases? It sounds like the standards thing is actually a defocusing, right?
It is. I think the way I think about it is you can't say, oh, we're going to do the sandwich thing. We'll take any enterprise that comes inbound and is interested. It's easy to end up in a scenario where you have a customer who wants to spend a year getting you to implement the proof of concept, which isn't a good use of your time that early. But if you can be highly selective and treat it as you are picking who these 3 partners are, rather than you're hoping anyone will buy the tool from you, that allows you to only focus on those 3. And as soon as you have them say, great, unless someone else is a perfect fit and matches them exactly, we're not taking on any more. And that means you don't have to think about ramping up a huge go-to-market organization or a sales team or a bunch of account executives. You can do that yourself as a CEO founder. And then on the flip side, it looks a lot more like a bottom-up company, and so most of the focus can remain there.
Yeah. This brings me to something that we've talked about in as we prepared for this panel. The B2B playbook for developer tools or enterprise software, to me by now it feels like it's so well understood. There's 1,000 blog posts on every topic and everything. And at the same time, we are seeing, I think, sparks of new models. So we've gone, PLG, and there's usage-based pricing and customer-built growth and things like that. Are you seeing any emerging business models or go-to-market strategies that you've seen a company do or a few companies do that you think more people should know about and that aren't used enough?
There are a few. I think they're more of kind of like parts of a strategy. So I think there have been a few companies that have emerged that do in-product sort of nudging and things like that. Like based on the customer profile, based on the actions that they're taking, there should be strategic nudges to upsell within the product. I think that's becoming more of an essential thing, especially kind of given the macro environment and how sales cycles are getting longer. So just kind of having automated things that you don't need to be spending a ton of sales and marketing on.
Yeah. There's 2 things that come to mind. Like one is, I think, again, in the data space, seeing a few businesses on top of sort of the main business they have, almost do like a data exchange business on top. So similar to, I think Snowflake moved quite heavily into that space, and then we saw a few verticalized solutions in that as well, kind of like sort of a community model, but also connecting customers among each other and then putting each other into that network as partners and customers. So it's almost like a self-running go-to-market motion in the end. So I think that it's really hard to pull it off, especially if you start fresh as a company. But I think if you make it work, that can be a really interesting mode. And then I think on the open source side, actually, I feel there's some conversations happening on how do you commercialize almost the contribution back into the product more. Because so far, licensing has really focused on allowing people to use whatever they get out of an open source product, but it's not really been licensed how you contribute back and basically commercializing that piece. And so I think there's been some chatter about certification models. I even read something about unions in developer communities, which just feels quite out there, but at least people are talking about it. And I think there might be some interesting stuff coming there, actually.
So just to clarify what you mean
yeah.
Incentivizing users who are contributing code to a project to profit from that code somehow?
Basically, also making sure people actually have to be contributing back almost in a way. And I think that was the original idea of open source, right? Sort of having this contributing community. But I feel sort of the current licensing model, maybe copyleft or permissive, don't really necessarily ensure and reward that as much. And so I think that might be an interesting evolution of that model, essentially. What that looks like, I don't know yet, but one that I'm following.
I agree. And I think community is a continued big theme, and customers. One I've noticed, especially with earlier stage companies, is instead of, say, trying to end up on a stage themselves, they'll instead try to work with conferences or events to let their customers have talks at those stages. So then their engineers can be building a brand for the technologies they're using, but the company who wanted their customer on stage is getting that promotion of having a reference use case. And so figuring out how, instead of doing everything yourself in-house, maybe it's code contributions from your community, and maybe that's talks, and maybe that's something else. Mm-hmm. But however you can get those customers and community involved is definitely a big trend.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you guys briefly about crazy deep tech in a second, but something that I'm observing as an early stage investor is I've seen it feels like 10 auth companies in the past 3 weeks. 3 weeks before that, I feel like I saw 10 front-end tooling companies. So I guess my question is, why is this happening? Is it new? And what's your advice to founders who are operating in spaces that are crowded and that, sometimes to me it's like this is fully baked. Like I don't really understand how there's a new opportunity here. I don't want to call on one of you. I just kind of want you to jump in. So please feel free.
What's that?
Sure, I'll do it early, and then maybe one of you can weigh in on how it goes later. I definitely think it happens because those businesses, usually there is a market there that's good. Like I think all the auth companies came after the Okta Auth0 acquisition, and so everyone thought, oh, there's a gap for a good developer-first auth experience here.
Right.
I think the challenge is just because the market is a good space doesn't necessarily mean every founder should start a business there. And so especially at seed stage and from day one where there might not be a product yet, there's definitely not any traction. I'm really looking at why is this person building a business in this crowded space, and does it make sense for them specifically to be the one to build it? Because otherwise I'm just making a bet on one of 10 approaches without much reason to believe in any over the other, and that's not really good enough odds to make the bet. So I'd rather make it when I see someone and go, yeah, that person really has to build this.
Yeah, I think maybe so Founders Fund, we can invest at any stage at this point. We have growth funds. We frequently do pre-IPO rounds. And so at that point, yeah, there's more sort of variables to weigh because you can wait and see, when somebody claims, okay, well, we've got this very differentiated approach at the seed, at the Series A, and there's not that much data, you can wait and sort of build a relationship with the founder, talk to their customers, see how the product is actually doing in the market, and make an investment. So similar to our approaches with like a Figma or a Persona, just like taking lots of customer calls, hearing how mission critical these products really are, that they are truly differentiated. I mean, that's kind of the best evidence. At that point, it might be a little bit too obvious, though, and you don't get obviously as much upside as the earlier investors. But yeah, that's kind of one of the strategies we use.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's also coming back to the point of being, as a founder, aware of the fact that there's a lot of competition at the same stage, and being super clear about articulating why you're the one that is going to win, either found a product, found a market fit, or it can even be something on execution ability. Did you learn something about the market and say, actually, product-wise, this can be easily done, but we think operationally we can do something that is smarter than everyone else in the market. It could be that too, right? If it's a kind of a race on operation or execution. So really being super articulate about that is important. And that's what that is essentially is what attracts us to early stage founders there, I think. And I think it's also interesting actually in the context of OpenAI and data models, and we see a lot of businesses building on top of them, and sort of then obviously your moat isn't sitting in the data model anymore. Is it then the data that you can accrue? That's really hard to do. Sort of being just aware and clear is what we're looking for, I think.
So that actually brings me to the question that we talked about of large language models, these novel approaches, DALL-E, GPT-3. Do you think those are substrate for new businesses?
Absolutely. So I kind of had my light bulb moment when I was talking to one of my friends who I consider one of the best engineers that I know. And he told me that everybody on his team was using Copilot, which is, GitHub's code autocomplete product. And it was saving them multiple hours every day. And so that kind of, there was this light bulb moment that the technology is already there to essentially be a really smart assistant for programmers or other types of technical people. So I'm very bullish on the same technology automating lots of task and dev tools as a software assistant, things like that. And then also on the generative side, there's a lot of cool stuff coming out in art and music and copywriting. But echoing Julie's point, I don't think it's just these models that are the moat. I think it's also the story of you finding proprietary data through your users interacting with those models, and then also you creating a much better product experience. Because the models themselves, you can only hope for a few month head start, even if you use the latest models. But I think you can develop other lasting moats.
I agree. I think it's about the verticalized experience within how you're using that model and really deeply understanding the end user. So we've been seeing a lot of them applied to design tools recently. And so seeing designers thinking about how they're going to use this AI augmentation to help people make the right experiences makes more sense than like me, for instance, picking it up and being like, I'm going to make a cool new design tool using this model. You just really want to see someone who has the expertise in this space applying the new technology to it.
Yeah. And I think even maybe large corporations have a bit of a head start here because they have access to proprietary large data sets already, while if you're a new startup that is starting in the space, you need to build that up from scratch. And even if you can train on public data set, that's never going to mimic exactly where your end user might sit or the specific use case you're going for. And so I think that's actually also going to be interesting how I think Shopify just released something today as well, playing around with some of OpenAI's models. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, the things that I get most excited about are the stories that are like, this data is not there. Nobody has it yet.
Yeah.
But we have this idea, and we're going to get this data faster than anybody else. And I think that's like a really cool story as an investor.
Agree.
And then we're going to sell the data.
And we're going to use it for our models.
Right. One thing I've been struck by at this conference and coming to Copenhagen is the amount of attention that this ecosystem in particular seems to put on moonshot hardware, like legitimate technology, like for real. There's examples of Seasony and Seaborg and other companies that are building robotics or nuclear reactors or quantum systems. Your funds, I think, are primarily known for software. How do you think about hardware and deep tech, and what's your advice to founders that are listening to us talk about developer tooling and enterprise SaaS and thinking, well, this is not going to help me like sell robots for dairy farms? So do you look at those companies? Do you have any hope for those companies? Anyone?
I mean, I could take it. I will say, I primarily focus on software, but my fund has a lot of notable hardware investments. We were very early in SpaceX. We incubated Anduril, which is a defense tech company, have invested in numerous robotics companies. And so, my advice is, and my colleagues would honestly probably give better advice, but sort of focus in on, why you sort of the founder market fit, and then sort of what your moat's going to be, what your strategy is going to be, especially around capital, especially given these current times. So making sure that there are very clear milestones as to, okay, we're going to raise this much. This is exactly how much we need to hit these milestones to raise this next round. Because I don't think capital-intensive businesses will be very easy, especially over the next few years. And so being very laser-focused on your sort of fundraising strategy, the milestones that you're going to hit, what you're going to de-risk for the next set of investors, I think is very important.
Yeah. Maybe to that point, also finding investors that exactly understand what those milestones are, how that looks like, and actually can help you on that journey. And there is specialized funds for hardware. So go seek out those and work with them closely, I think. That's what I would say to that point.
I think that's good advice across the board. I think talking to fewer investors who are more focused on what you are doing will almost always yield better results.
Yeah.
But in terms of techniques, I often think a lot of people end up borrowing better techniques from other industries rather than just doing what everyone else is doing. Like I bet dairy farmers also have conferences that they go to and give each other advice. I don't know about them in particular, but I've seen it with the people who figure out how to buy which cleaning supplies for schools have their own conferences and spend a bunch of time talking to each other. And so you wouldn't think these niche spaces would necessarily, you'd be able to apply classic enterprise software techniques to, but you often can if you think about it the right way. So I think getting out here and being exposed to lots of different types of companies is one good way to learn those things your competitors might not be doing.
And you've hinted that the market has changed a bit, which is apparently true. I think we all know that. I think by now it's clear. I guess my question for you is not, what's happening in the market. I think we all know. I think my question for you is, how has the advice you're giving founders changed over the past few months? And what do you anticipate, for a founder who, let's say, has 12 months of cash right now? What's the best advice for them? I know that's a very general question, but you're talking to founders every day.
Yeah. So I hope we were giving on like general business building items similar advice also a few months ago, but I think just the number one thing I think, and I count myself into that audience as well. I started investing or in VC 7 years ago, so I haven't really seen a proper dip myself yet. Versus some of the founders of our firm who've been started this like 20 years ago, right? They've seen multiple cycles, both economically and technology-wise. And the constant voice is that actually this might last longer than everyone anticipates and might be more deep and more severe than we think. And so I think there's sort of an initial temptation to maybe make smaller incremental changes here and there. But I think sort of thinking about this more aggressively almost as than you would anticipate is actually needed. So instead of making 10 small cuts, sometimes it's better to make one deeper cut and set yourself up, for instance, although it's hard in the beginning and you don't think the environment warrants that. Really thinking not just about reducing burn, thinking forward, but maybe also really going a bit deeper than you think you have to is something that we sometimes have to discuss right now, even though the pipeline might not show it yet or you don't really have so much churn yet, more like future-looking pipeline is impacted. It might still come, and I think that's sort of something that we'll see.
I think one that's always good to consider, but the economy sometimes makes it a little bit easier, is as a founder, you feel the moral obligation of you are never going to give up on your baby and you are building this company and only this company forever. But if someone came to me as a seed stage company today with 12 months, and maybe there was a little bit of signal, but not that strong yet, I would want to be having that conversation when you're not at the we're running out of money next payroll cycle to say, okay, if things go well, what do we think this starts looking like? Do we think we're going to need to extend our runway by 6 months or a year to get the next milestone? Or do we think that there's a chance in another 6 months we go, oh, this isn't the opportunity we thought it was at the beginning. We have an opportunity to reassess this and maybe think about, would this be better within another company? And kind of think about both playbooks at the same time. So while it's emotionally unpleasant, I think it's a good moment to do that and really think about how you want to solve the problem for the long run, not just with this specific venture.
That all makes sense. And I guess maybe on the flip side of something that we were talking about earlier, but I do think in these times, focus is a good thing, and being really focused on metrics and sales efficiency and how much you're burning and all of that is super important. And yeah, I think sort of discipline and focus is sort of the main things that we're helping our portfolio companies work through.
What's your advice? I mean, you touched on it, but what's your advice on the psychological side? These are very tough conversations for us to have with founders and for founders to have with their teams. Any tips or examples you can give anonymously that can help people navigate these super difficult decisions?
What we've done with some of the, I don't want to say younger, but maybe more first-time founders or founders who, again, haven't seen a recession yet, basically, in their professional life. We've actually been connecting them with founders in the portfolio who might have been through that journey before and had laid off people or had to go through cuts. And I think that reassurance and kind of almost a playbook and tips how to have those conversations, or someone to just go after the conversation and say like, hey, this was really hard, and they've been through that as well. I think that's something that worked nicely for us. It's been appreciated. But yeah, certainly not that easy.
Yeah. I mean, something that I've noticed, I'm curious if you guys have seen this, is that we prided ourselves on being a lead investor. And we would brag to our LPs that we were lead investors and we had the largest ownership and all of that thing. And then when the markets are down, there's responsibility that comes with that.
Yeah.
And we see a number of companies where there is no lead investor. And so there's no one there to do to guide that process. But if you take that responsibility seriously, someone has to do that. And even though I'm old enough to have been through downturns, like it's a re-education for me because I've got to remember that psychology of like, oh, it's normal for startups to fail. And that's some of the messaging that we've been giving people revolves around like just if you level set, like I have one case where the messaging is sort of, listen, even if this thing blows up, you're going to be fine 2 years from now. But if you keep running at the wall with this, it's actually a worse outcome most likely than even if you just shut it down and get everyone a job and then move on. If there's questions from the audience, we'd love to take them. I think there's people with mics, and you have 3 of the best global VCs in the world here. So if anyone has a question or wants to pitch their startup in 30 seconds.
Hello, my name is Teemu Tervo, CEO of Selai. Great discussion, thank you. Oh, thank you, okay, now you can hear me. My question is that I have been talking with some VCs, I've been talking with a lot of founders here and so on. And I feel like, is there a trend that some of the founders say that they try not to go into VC road, they try to avoid VC money because of the too much control on one party, and instead they are thinking like different kind of funding options instead of VCs. Also, there has been a couple of like funding partners who are not acting like VCs, but they're like small stock markets for everyone to get involved and so on. Is this just something that I've been seeing more, or is this a trend? Do you see that some startups are trying to avoid VC money because of the control that they give over?
So alternatives to VC and downsides of VC and terms. Sounds like, right?
I don't think it's a new trend. I think it always it varies by what kind of company you want to build and what kind of founder you are. I personally would never try to talk someone into taking VC because it's not necessarily the control part, but you're kind of implicitly saying you want to build a specific type of company when you take VC, where you're saying, we want to grow, we want to have a big exit event, we're in this for the long run. This isn't like we make $2 million a year and me and my co-founders have a nice life. And so you don't want to push someone towards a journey that they don't want to be on, and that's the most important part of it. I think particularly now with the economy, it's definitely seed stage companies can still raise. There's still the capital there. But having a little bit more time to think through what type of business you're building and what you want to do before raising can also be a good idea. I've talked to plenty of companies that have done that first before saying, okay, to get to the next stage, we want to raise.
I guess a different way to phrase that question, right, is would you guys agree that there are definitely going to be companies that are going to go out of business in this climate because they took VC money at all, or because they took way too much VC money at the wrong price and now are hosed? I would agree with that statement. I don't know if you guys, that's true, right?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think that it's going to be also there was a lot of VC money available in the market, and then I think some maybe businesses, founders that actually didn't really wanted to go on that journey, then took VC money because it was really available. And I think actually being a founder, building a VC-backed business is incredibly hard and not always the most rewarding journey along the journey. And it sets you up for building either this 10 billion business, or that's basically where you want to get to, or multi-billion business. And that's just a different journey than a lot of other businesses. And I agree with you. I think there's going to be a few businesses that maybe, based on the industry they're in, the space they're in, don't even have the product or DNA or the industry DNA to build that. And I think that's going to become clearer when there's not so much funding available, essentially, which is going to be tough. But yeah, I think it goes back to your point, just asking yourself the really honest question, do I want to build a VC-backed business with the roller coaster that it comes with or not is even more important now and more prevalent now, just because there's not so much money in the market. And that's maybe the new aspect about it the last few months.
Yeah.
And I guess over the past, year or two, I have seen a lot more of what you were describing, especially when it comes to crypto, because I think sort of the spirit of crypto is that there is not one owner or there are a few owners. There needs to be a lot. So that's one place where I've particularly seen a lot of resistance to taking a ton of VC money for a ton of ownership, versus rounds where lots of VCs get a tiny bit of ownership, or it's lots of individual people or something like that. So that is one area where I have seen that model way more. maybe traditional tech.
Maybe one addition, I do want to say though that I think there's super exciting businesses out there that are not VC funded and that are bootstrapped or funded, crowdfunded, and it just fits the business perfectly. And so I think again, just going back to awareness is the point versus one is more exciting than the other. It's more what fits me and the business that I want to build the best, and then build an exciting company on top of that.
Do you have time for one more question or no? Yeah. Any other question? Looks like there's one. Okay.
My name is Ajay. I'm the founder of GreenSwap. We're an API for supermarkets to track barcode-level carbon footprints. My question is, previously, last year, we used to get really good terms for founders when we approach VCs, right? Now it seems like the good times are over. So how are founders supposed to navigate this reality that we're in now, where the power dynamics have kind of shifted, and it's back in the VCs, back to the VCs now?
I'm so glad I'm not a panelist.
I think it's more of a reversion to the mean, right? Like I think last year in particular was an anomaly. And so it is just a little bit more like it used to be. But also with the exception that I think ever since COVID happened, there has been a lot more sort of investor competition for companies in general because you can take the first meeting remotely, or it's way more common to like not have to travel to fundraise or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's a bad answer, but sort of conventional wisdom from the last few years, not just looking at 2021 where the playbooks got thrown out the window and people did a lot of things that just, had never happened before.
Yeah. But I think it's good for, I think a lot of really good founders out there, the best founders in the market, really realize that that's also a good shift for them, having to have the chance to meet the investors they want to work on a board with for 10 years. I think there'll be a lot of businesses that wake up tomorrow and realize that the person that sits on a board for the next 10 years is not going to be someone they want to work with. But because the process was moving so fast and it was a really good offer on the table, you of course take it. It makes sense, right, from a business perspective. But just personally, now we meet people again over a few months, get to know them until they're ready to start the business. And I think that's good for both sides, to be honest. Yeah.
I guess for both this question and the last one, I would just assume that if you're going to start a venture-backed business, you'll get a period of time and it goes well and you have your 10-year journey. There will be a time like 2021 and there will be a time like 2022 and you're signing yourself up for both. And your job isn't really to worry about which of those you're in. It's how to make the most of whichever of those you're in at the time. Yeah. And when the money is good and you can find the right people to work with, take it. And when you need to hunker down and maybe focus on the fundamentals of your business, do that. And just kind of figure out which playbook you're running and just assume you'll have to run both.
So just before we end, I want to ask you all in one sentence, what is the secret to a successful pitch meeting with you? Go.
Help me understand your unfair advantage or secret.
Show me the actual product.
Okay, I wanted to say that, but I'm not going to say
it. Sorry.
I think also I love hearing your story. Like, what gets you out of bed to start this business? Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Let's go.